What up, Randies? My name is Stan, and I think it's about time that I acknowledge Pokémon Sun and Pokémon Moon. Now, I'll be upfront about this with you guys. I almost didn't make this video, mainly because I feel like there are way too many people making way too much content about what amounts to almost no information at all. We've got reactions, speculations, trailer breakdowns, and even satirical videos about how stupid and annoying the PokeTuber community has become over the last few years as they continuously blow every little thing out of proportion. But you know what? I don't care. I really want to make this video despite what the community may think because I love Pokemon, and with the exception of a few videos here and there, I think people at large are speculating on the wrong things entirely. I don't care that there's vehicles, I don't care that there's a render of a bird, and I especially don't care if there's official Pokemon-human hybrids. Because, yeah, that's literally going full Digimon. Please don't do that. But guys, come on, this is a Pokemon game. We know that there's going to be 3 lovable starters, we know that you're going to have a rival, and we know that the whole point of the game will be to catch them all and become the very best like no one ever was. Unless they change the formula just enough to make it fresh. Which is why I'm making this video in the first place. Look, I love Pokemon, and I'd buy the new game even if the first 3 towns had nothing but Spindas to catch, but let's face it, the formula's gotten a little stale at this point. And so, in the spirit of switching things up, here are my top 5 things Pokemon Sun and Moon should have, but probably won't. Number 5. Once in a while, it seems Game Freak likes to pay homage or bring back certain elements from specific generations as it builds new regions. The most obvious example of this is how virtually every generation has callbacks from Gen 1, but once in a while, the games will give other regions besides Kanto and Nudge back into the spotlight, and personally, I would love to see Sun and Moon acknowledge the often forgotten Gen 4. Now, it's not that I think Gen 4 is underrated, even though it sort of is, but this has more to do with the fact that it's been a long time since Sinnoh and its Pokemon have gotten some love within the core series of games, and I think the best way to acknowledge the most forgotten part of Pokemon's past is by giving us Mega Evolutions for its memorable starters. Yes, I know that Mega Evolution is controversial in the first place, and even though I'm not personally a fan of the concept, this is a feature that Game Freak's clearly committed to, which means we're absolutely going to get a ton of new Megas anyway, so why not show the Sinnoh starters some love? I know logically the next step is to give the Johto trio of Meganium, Feraligatr, and Typhlosion Mega Evolutions first, but personally I'm okay with holding off on them because their generations have already gotten outstanding remakes, and I personally feel like now's the perfect time to reignite people's love for Gen 4, considering it's been almost a decade that has taken a backseat to the more popular entries in the series. But even though I think implementing Turtwig, Chimchar, and Piplup into the Sun and Moon story, similarly to how Gen 6 handled the Kanto starters, would be a perfect addition, the truth is that if any starter Pokemon will be getting Megas in Sun and Moon, it's going to either be Gens 2, 6, or 7 itself, which is completely understandable. Either way, it'll be interesting to see how much influence Mega Evolution has in Sun and Moon. But personally, I think it's important to let Gen 4 out of the shadows, because if Game Freak keeps shunning it forever, eventually we'll just move on. Number 4. Does this next entry contain some personal bias? Well, even if the answer is yes, the fact remains that Evolutions are one of the Pokemon Company's most popular brands regardless of what I think or not. From all of the merchandise and cosplay, it's clear that audiences love them, and yet for some reason it always feels like a special treat when we get a brand new member of the Eevee family. I mean, there's 18 Pokemon types at this point, meaning that we've still got at least 9 more Evolutions to be discovered, and I think that with this being the 20th anniversary and all, Sun and Moon are the perfect games to bring us at least one more edition. Personally, I believe that after how cute and feminine Sylveon was designed, it's time we got the exact opposite, in the form of a powerful dragon or steel type evolution, but there's no denying that the most useful would probably be a flying type, as it's almost impossible to do an Eevee-only playthrough without sacrificing one party member for an HM slave in any of the past core adventures. However, despite the mass love for this specific Pokemon line, Game Freak seems to enjoy making new evolutions scarce, opting to only introduce new variations every other generation. Despite this, I still think that fans would go nuts, and I think it'd be a great opportunity for the Pokemon Company to essentially have a 20th anniversary Evolution mascot for all of its branding. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens when we finally get our first taste of real information. Number 3. Okay, I'll admit it. Those last two things were more additions to get players excited rather than ways to re-energize the Pokemon formula, but I promise from here on out I'll be talking only about changes that could add some spice into the current recipe. To start off, I think it's time that we finally do away with the 8 gym leader tradition. Now, I know there's likely some symbolic reason for having the same formula of 8 gyms followed by the Elite Four, but honestly, this is a tradition that's way overdue for an upgrade. Personally, I would rather have anywhere from 6 to 16 gyms in Sun and Moon, just as long as the number isn't the obvious 8. Whether this means 6 meaningful gyms that are important to the plot, or fighting 8 okay leaders and then a surprise reveal of 2 powerful post-game gyms, I don't really care. It's just sort of mind-boggling that in a series with over 700 Pokemon and 5 sequels that only one generation had more gyms than 8. But despite how obvious this suggestion may seem, the truth is that out of either some symbolic reason or just due to sheer tradition, Sun and Moon are practically guaranteed to follow the same exact formula when it comes to both gym leaders and the Elite Four, which is a shame because oftentimes traditions are formed from limitations, and this is the perfect example of a series that no longer has limits, but takes cues from a popular game that did. So please, Game Freak, break this one way outdated tradition, or if it is symbolic, at the very least give us some more to remember from the 8 gym leaders that you do create. If there's anyone who can find a way to reinvigorate this boring trope, it's you. Number 2. Quick question. Who's your favorite rival in a core series Pokemon game? Odds are that you probably just chose Blue, Silver, or maybe even Barry or May. But you know who probably gets the least amount of recognition from the community? Rivals like Sharon, Bianca, Serena, that dancing guy. And yes, I know his name's Tierno, but my point is that with each subsequent Pokemon game, the series tends to do more with its rival concept, with increasingly forgettable results. Don't get me wrong, it would have been extremely boring if we'd gotten a clone of Blue for 6 generations, but at some point Game Freak just started adding so many characters and pseudo-rivals that the concept of even having a rival is starting to lose its meaning. So I guess what I'd like to see in terms of rivals from Pokemon Sun and Moon is instead of upping the ante and adding more friends that you battle, let's dial things back to the days of the jerktastic and challenging adversary. You know, that one character in the game who pushes you to grow for the sole reason of wiping that smug look off of his or her face. Of course, I'd rather this rival have an actual character arc like Silver rather than someone like Blue, but really the only thing I ask for is that they be memorable in some way. I mean, it's sort of sad that most people remember N far more than they remember Sharon, but it sort of makes sense when you consider that N was not only more sympathetic in his game, but also didn't have to split the spotlight with Bianca or another rival, and Sharon was in 2 games. Again, I don't even mind the fact that sometimes we get 2 rivals to balance out the whole 3-starter rock, paper, scissors thing. But I think that for this generation at least, I'd much rather have one well-developed and memorable rival rather than 4 friends who sort of get lost in the shuffle. You tried your hand at making the rival mechanic feel fresh again, and for the most part, you did succeed. But remember, Game Freak, sometimes less is more. Number 1. Alright, so with those suggestions out of the way, here's the one question that every fan of the series has had since the ending credits of Silver and Gold. Why can't we have multiple generations in another Pokemon game? If you've ever played through the 2nd generation installments, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. How cool was it to finish your Johto journey, only to then realize that you could actually go back through Kanto and face off against the region's very best trainers? If Pokemon Sun and Moon did something along these lines, not only would it tackle the criticism X and Y faced for its lack of post-game content, but it would also give us more gyms, familiar faces, and overall just be an incredible tribute to the 20th anniversary as a whole. Also, if the post-game region was Kalos, we could finally get some answers regarding areas like the power plant, items like the strange souvenir, and gain a better understanding of what the heck Zygarde even really is. In fact, one of Gen 6's greatest mysteries stems from the maze Pokemon depicted in Perfume Palace, and how nobody really ever had a real answer for the one towards the top left part of the maze. But interestingly enough, the Pokemon to its right is Solrock, the meteorite Pokemon that just happens to resemble a sun. Eerie coincidence? Almost definitely, but honestly I wouldn't care what secondary region we'd get, just as long as we get to revisit old landmarks and faces that we grew up with in a time when Pokemon nostalgia is everywhere. However, knowing Game Freak, it probably just isn't in the cards, as they've had the hardware necessary to create multiple generations on one cartridge for almost 2 decades, and seemingly only incorporated Kanto into Gen 2 because they assumed those games would be the last in the Pokemon series. But as a lifelong Pokemon fan and gamer in general, I know that whatever the developers are busy creating right now will likely be yet another memorable experience worthy of the Pocket Monsters name. And I know I'll be trying to catch them all once again this November, regardless if we get any of these changes or not. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode, but feel free to debate any of these points in the comment section below. I know some of these additions and suggestions definitely aren't for everybody, so I'd like to hear what you guys want to see from the games when they come out this fall. I'll have another episode of the rarest Funko Pops for you next week, but until then, follow us on Twitter at Random10s, subscribe on YouTube for loads more Pokemon content, and, as I always say, happy hunting, baby rhinos, and happy 20th anniversary to one of my favorite video game series of all time.